So we thought we'd have a couple of songs to put us in a First World War mood. So we'll start off, if we may, Nick, with Tipperary. Between 1814 and 1914, the families that made up the population of this parish changed relatively little. Despite the Industrial Revolution and tremendous economic advances of that century, rural villages continued on much as they always had. But the residents of Pitminster parish in 2014 are very different from those of 1914. Many of the old family names have disappeared from the electoral roll, and the people now in the parish and in this room are drawn from all over the UK and further afield. One of the root causes for this upheaval was the First World War, or the Great War, as it was then known, from 1914 to 1918. This evening, we will be delving into the history of some of the current residents of the parish to see how the events of those years started separate chains of events that led each of us to be here tonight, at how sometimes the paths of our forebears may have crossed in unexpected ways, and how very lucky some of us are to be here at all.
Arguably, the European powers were ready for war in 1914. A dangerous mixture of scientific industrialization, imperial ambition, and a grab by emerging powers for the territory of older declining empires made war always a likely outcome. But in the West, it was Germany, fueled by what was described as archaic militarism, global ambition, and neurotic insecurity, that took the offensive with the invasion of Belgium on the 3rd of August 1914. A British ultimatum demanding that Belgian neutrality be recognised expired at 11 p.m. London time on the 4th of August. And the nation was at war.
At once, recruitment of the extra troops required for a major war was started, with volunteers drafted into new territorial battalions of their local regiment. In some parts of the country, PALS battalions were raised from individual towns or districts, a practice that ended when whole regiments were practically obliterated later in the war. But in many places, volunteers ended up being allocated to units completely unconnected with their city or county. In August 1914, the Somerset Light Infantry was made up of 3 regular battalions. The 1st Battalion, based in Colchester, landed in France on 22nd August as part of the British Expeditionary Force. The 2nd was based in India and remained there throughout the war, and the 3rd was a training unit initially based in Taunton, but transferring to Northern Ireland in 1917, presumably as part of the response to the Easter Uprising of 1916 by Republicans. With the outbreak of war, new territorial battalions were speedily formed across the county. The 1st 4th, raised in Bath, was initially sent to India in October 1914, but was soon transferred to Basra, in what is now Iraq, then Mesopotamia. In September, the 2nd 4th had been formed from the same city and was sent to India before being deployed variously around the empire and ending up on the Western Front in June 1918. The 1st 5th, raised in Taunton, was also sent to Bombay, but redeployed to Egypt in 1917, closely followed by the 2nd 5th, who ended up in Burma. Later, 3rd 4th and 3rd 5th battalions stayed in the UK, possibly because by this wave of recruitment, fewer men were fit for frontline service. Various other service and garrison battalions were also formed in the county, including the 6th Service Battalion, recruited in Taunton in August 1914, merging first with the 5th Battalion of the Ox and Bucks Light Infantry in April 1918, returning to England for reconstruction in June 1918, and merging with the 13th Battalion Duke of Cornwall's Light Infantry later the same month, before returning to France in August. The implications of this reconfiguration we will discover later on. Meanwhile, war was beginning to affect day-to-day life at home for the first time in 100 years.
I have two excerpts from the Somerset Gazette, as it was then called, in August and September 1914. The first is from the 15th of August 1914 and is captioned, "Men Who Are Wanted," and the subheading reads, "Doctors, motorcyclists and skilled workers of all kinds. The War Office require immediately for service the following men at the stated rates of pay: foreman artificers, 70 shillings, coppersmiths, electricians, pattern makers, 52 shillings and sixpence, blacksmiths, dispensers, drivers of motor lorries, farriers, fitters, moulders, painters, saddlers, turners, wheelers, 42 shillings, bakers, butchers, clerks, cooks, hospital subordinates, tailors, 28 shillings, and labourers and loaders, brackets, packers, 21 shillings. Married men must allot 1/3 of their pay to their families, who will also receive separation allowance at army rates. A bounty of £5 will be paid each man on enlistment and £5 on discharge, in addition to any war gratuity. Clothing and equipment will be free." And from the Somerset Gazette of September 1914, we have a notice captioned Angesley. The Reverend Wyndham Erie writes, "My parish is, of course, so tiny, containing only 14 houses, that I have hardly a name for you. If I may draw on the members of my congregation or rifle club, however, I have not a bad list for you. Most of these live in the parish of Pitminster. I shall not be surprised if my little rifle club has to close this winter, as most of the members have enlisted. But it will have served its purpose well, for I think the majority of them had never fired a rifle till joining my club. Harry Fudge, our champion, Angesley, Sidney Lee, Leonard Lee, Herbert Maple Dorham, Albert Gould, J. Gulliford, and F. Blackmore, Pitminster."
The Somerset County Gazette, August 1914. Soldiers' Comforts. The Mrs. Bright have received a large consignment of good, reliable wool, suitable for soldiers' helmets, socks, jerseys, belts, etc. Full instructions for making same supplied. From the Mrs. A. and B. Bright, 16 East Street, Taunton.
Letters to a departing soldier. St. John's Villa, Pegram Road, Gloucester, August the 31st, 1914. Dear Ben, I am sorry I did not see you again last night, but when I went over, you had gone, and I had to go out this morning before you came down. I shall remember you in prayer, and I trust you may always realize that precious promise of God. He covereth you with his feathers, and underneath are everlasting arms, and he will never, never leave you. Now, ta-ta. May God bless you and keep you and bring you back again. From your friend and sister in Jesus, D. White. And from another neighbour, Dear Ben, I feel I must just write to you a word of cheer and comfort and commit you to your loving father's care. What a comfort it is to know wherever we are still in his keeping, and he is watching over his own. He never slumbers or sleeps. Lean hard on his loving arm, and he will bring all things to pass that we have committed to his keeping. My humble prayer to God is that he will keep you and bless you wherever you go, and bring you safe back to your loved ones again. I cannot say goodbye, for I feel it is not goodbye. We shall see one another again. So ta for now, and God bless you, is the sincere wish of your old friend, Mrs. Barnes.
Initially, the German plan to sweep through Belgium to the west of the French defensive line was successful. 2 divisions of the hastily deployed British Expeditionary Force had barely arrived in the town of Mons before the advancing German forces dislodged them to fight an heroic but chaotic retreat. But the French were able to counterattack, and the German advance was halted. On the eastern side of the battlefield there was a stalemate, so the Germans resolved to attempt to push through to the west. But the rest of the British force, almost the whole of the remaining regular army, dug in around the Belgian town of Ypres and held back the attack. And so were established the lines of the Western Front that would remain in much the same places for the next 4 years. In the autumn of 1914, 19-year-old Kenneth Wheater from Berkhamsted joins up and is allocated to the Royal Engineers. Despite being well educated and therefore a potential officer, he joins as an enlisted man. By early 1915, he is a sergeant in the 4th Special Battalion of the Royal Engineers. His unit was responsible for deploying gas as a weapon.
Paraded at 7:40 and were unloading and unloading lorries at Railhead, the main dump. In the afternoon went down to Bethune and had a swim in the open-air baths, and later on had a civilised tea, 2 cups of tea made in a teapot and 11 cakes. Came back in time for another tea and spent the evening writing letters, etc. Friday the 17th of September. Up early, seeing about parades and grubs, etc. And at 9:30 went up in a lorry to the village. The latter is at the end of a long communication trench. The ground is clay over chalk. 300 yards from the Germans. It's possible to look over the top at any time. Got back fairly early, feeling very hot. Sunday the 19th of September, 99 years ago today. We finished at 1:30 in the morning, and by 2:30 we're in bed, kept awake by rats. Up again at 7, at 8:15 we were off again to the yard, had the afternoon off for a rest, and were at work again from 5:15 till 9 o'clock, altogether a long day. And we jumped to Saturday, the 25th of September. The offensive started at 5. After only a 6 was done, the stuff blew in our own trench, that's the gas. Managed to run 3 cylinders off on my own, had to retire about 100 yards in the open, was just coming back when a bullet got me. It made this hole and 2 there. Was helped back and crawled to dressing station, was taken to hospital and wound dressed. The following day, the 26th of September, lay all day in classroom of school in Berquim, felt rotten, could not move, waiting all the time to be carried away. At 11 p.m. was moved on another motor ambulance. The following day, the 27th, wound examined, left alone, managed to get some sleep, stayed out in the open drizzle until 5 p.m. when taken into a marquee. After wound had been redressed, feeling better, very stiff. On 2 days later, the 29th, still waiting, boring day on my back, some men were taken away. At about 6 o'clock, was taken on a short journey, loaded on a train through a window removed for the purpose. Managed to get some sleep. The following day, passed Abbeville and arrived at Boulogne about midday. Was undressed, washed, wound attended to. Very nice to lie in a bed between sheets again after being 5 consecutive days on a stretcher. The following day, taken down to the SS Anglia from Boulogne to Dover. Woke up, had an egg breakfast. At 9 we started off. The journey was smooth and we arrived in Dover, lifted out by a crane and put on the LNWR hospital train. Went to Clapham Junction and via Willesden and Midland Line to Leeds. Given a fine tea at Bedford by some Red Cross people. Waited at the station and arrived at Leeds and by ambulance to the hospital at midnight. And then finally on the 5th of October, after 2 days of being in the hospital, same programme again, fed, sitting up a bit now, visiting day, plenty of people came in the afternoon, giving us fruit and cake, altogether a bean feast.
Across the country, young men are still volunteering. In London, Tom Yoxall, son of a butcher from Shepherd's Bush, signs on with the 2nd, 3rd Territorial London Yeomanry, then still a mounted regiment. By March 1915, he is serving in France, moving next to a regular battalion, the 3rd County of London, and then to the Leinsters, a nominally Irish regiment, but by now largely made up of Canadian volunteers. Service records like this are fairly common amongst those who survived the war, for when a regiment was very badly mauled, the remaining soldiers were dispersed to other regiments and the units completely reformed, for the obvious reason that morale would not have been well served if 500 new men were constantly reminded of the risks they faced by the presence of a handful of survivors amongst their ranks. Towards the end of 1917, Tom is recalled for officer training, quite possibly just because he had managed to survive for so long, and in January 1918 he is back in the trenches as a 2nd lieutenant in the Royal Fusiliers. Shortly afterwards, he is machine-gunned leading his section out of a trench and, obstinately refusing to die, is sent back to a long hospital stay in Birmingham. However, the army half-pay he saved there was enough to start him on the road to medical training, and thus the war enabled a butcher's boy to become a surgeon.
From the Somerset Gazette, August 1914, by our special lady correspondent. The dreaded black lists. These terrible long lists of our killed, wounded, and missing heroes are so eagerly scanned by us all, for scarcely anyone that has a dear relative or loved friend at the front, and never have the casualties been so fatal and lengthy. One positively sickens with dread each time, and this morning, to my grief, I came across the name of a cousin of my own, an only son, who has been wounded and lies at King Edward VII's Hospital, and also of a nephew of an old friend, who, alas, has been killed. Each day we hear of fresh relatives and friends who have enlisted and whose subsequent fate none may tell. Yet even so, our hearts swell with pride at the thought of their bravery and heroism.
Fred Owen, the grandfather of Pitminster resident Cathy Crosby, was a relative veteran of 37 when he signed up in 1915 with the 5th Battalion of the Yorkshire Regiment, the Green Howards, otherwise known as Alexandra the Princess of Wales' own. He saw action on the Somme and at the Arras offensive before being killed in action during the Third Battle of Ypres, more commonly known as Passchendaele. On October 28, 1917, his unit was defending the railway line near Poelcapelle, and he is buried in the nearby military cemetery. The Germans along the Ypres salient had been reinforced by hardened men from the Eastern Front via the railway and utilized mustard gas against the British in the sector. It was a costly battle which the Allies eventually won after losing 310,000 men and the enemy 260,000. Fred's death is recorded in the battalion diary, which also charts their entire campaign and is available to view on the internet. Fred, a warehouseman, left a widow Nellie, with whom he had a son Arthur, named after his uncle, who was also killed in 1915 after joining up the previous year in the Manchester Regiment. Arthur, Catherine's father, was given a free place at Manchester Grammar School as a tribute to his father's service. At the request of his widow, Fred's headstone in Flanders is marked with the dedication, "His father called." He is also remembered in the list of the fallen in St Chrysostom's Church in Rusholme, Manchester.
For the Fallen, a poem by Robert Lawrence Binion, published in the Times on the 21st of September 1914. With proud thanksgiving, a mother for her children, England mourns for her dead across the sea. Flesh of her flesh they were, spirit of her spirit, fallen in the cause of the free. Solemn the drums thrill, death august and royal sings sorrow up into immortal spheres. There is music in the midst of desolation, and a glory that shines upon our tears. They went with songs to the battle. They were young, straight of limb, true of eye, steady and aglow. They were staunch to the end, against odds uncounted. They fell with their faces to the foe. They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. They mingle not with their laughing comrades again. We sit no more at familiar tables of home. They have no lot in our labour of the daytime. They sleep beyond England's foam. But where our desires are, and our hopes profound, felt as a wellspring that is hidden from sight, to the innermost heart of their own land, they are known, as the stars are known to the night, as the stars that shall be bright when we are dust, moving in marches upon the heavenly plain, as the stars that are starry in the time of our darkness, to the end, they remain.
At Cannons Grove, the Waddy family were by now deeply involved with the war. Jack Waddy was born in 1888 and after education at Clifton College in Cambridge, completed his medical training at King's College Hospital in London qualifying MRCS and LRCP. By 1912, he had already started on what would have been a brilliant medical career as a surgeon, but straight away in August 1914, he volunteered to join the Royal Army Medical Corps and was commissioned as a temporary lieutenant on the 4th of August. He was sent out immediately to a base hospital in France, but after only 1 month there, he managed to get himself posted as a regimental medical officer to the 1st Battalion of the Somerset Light Infantry, which was by then in France with the Expeditionary Force. He took part, caring for the wounded, in all the early hard-fought battles. The retreat from Mons, the First Battle of the Marne, at the Aisne, and at Armentières, during which the battalion suffered 1,200 casualties. At full strength, the battalion was 1,007 men, so more than the entire unit's strength was lost. Dr. Waddy was mentioned in dispatches in January 1915, and in February he was awarded the Military Cross. On the 17th of March, near Plugstead, Plug Street to the Tommies, which was part of the Ypres salient, he was shot by a sniper whilst tending the wounded in no man's land. He died later in the day. The regimental history reports, the loss of this gallant officer was keenly felt by the battalion. He was the son of that hardy veteran, Lieutenant Colonel J.M.E. Waddy, who formerly commanded the 2nd Battalion and who at an advanced age went out to India as commanding officer of a territorial battalion. Lieutenant Colonel Waddy had previously retired from active service in 1898 before volunteering to go to India on the declaration of war. Following his return to Somerset in 1918, he was instrumental in arranging for the erection of the War Memorial and for siting it looking down at the glorious view of Taunton Deane spread out below. Richard Waddy, his other son, served from 1915 to 1919 in France with the Somerset Light Infantry and later the West Yorkshire Regiment. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Order and the Croix de Guerre, and also entered the war as a lieutenant colonel.
In the Home and Away column in the Somerset Gazette for August 19 appeared the following two articles. The first is captioned Wounded at Mons, which is an account of the injuries sustained by Corporal Mechanic J. Casely, son of Mrs. Casely of Blagden Hill. We're told that Corporal Casely was badly wounded at Mons in the left foot, leg and thigh, and has a severe wound over the left eye. It was exactly 6 weeks from the time he left England until he was back in England again. But actually, the second article, which contains slightly more copy, is captioned Trap Accident. On Saturday evening, a trap accident occurred at Blagden Hill, in which a little girl had a remarkable escape. Mrs. Derman, wife of Mr. Derman, builder, who resides almost at the top of Blagden Hill, intended to go to Taunton in her pony and trap. She put a little girl belonging to Mr. and Mrs. Pope in the trap to take her home, some 300 yards further down the hill. The pony was led up the lane to the main road. The halter was left on the pony by mistake, and the 12-year-old son of Mr. and Mrs. Derman went to take off the bridle. Mrs. Derman was holding the pony when it bolted down the hill at a tremendous rate, the little child being the only one in the trap. Mrs. Derman held on for some distance but was thrown down, received some cuts on the face, and the wheel went over her foot. When it had nearly reached the chapel, the pony fell. Mr. Harry Clode ran to the main road and was just in time to snatch the child from the trap, she being none the worse for her exciting experience. The pony again bolted down the hill, and when near the sharp bend, it dashed across the road and jumped over the hedge into an orchard, the trap being on one side of the hedge and the pony swinging on the other. Messrs. H. Clode, F. Bradbeer, and D. Matthews were soon on the scene. The harness was unfastened and the pony released. The pony received some cuts about the legs and the harness was damaged. It being Taunton Market Day, there was a good deal of traffic on the road, but most fortunately, there was no collision.
As the war dragged on into its first winter, conditions in the trenches were often grim. After the Battle of the Marne, the Germans had generally withdrawn to higher ground, leaving the Allies to build their trenches in the wetter areas below. Harry Patch from Bath, who was the longest surviving British World War I soldier, described the conditions to Max Arthur in 2005.
Our living conditions were lousy, dirty, no matter what the weather was, whether it was hot or cold, rain or fine, you were in there for 4 days and 3 nights. There were rats as big as cats. And if you had any leather equipment, the damn things would gnaw at it. And we had leather equipment, and they would chew at it. And if you stood still long enough, they would chew your bootlaces. Lice, they were lousy. The lice were the size of grains of rice, each with its own bite, each with its own itch. When we could, we would run hot wax from a candle down the seams of our trousers, our vests, whatever you had, to burn the buggers out. It was the only thing to do, and eventually, when we got to Rouen, coming back, they took every stitch off us and gave us a suit of sterilized blue material, and the uniforms they took of us, they burned them to get rid of the lice. For the 4 months I was in France, I never had a bath, and I never had any clean clothes to put on, nothing. Now our rations, you were lucky if you got some bully beef and a biscuit. You couldn't get your teeth into it. Sometimes, if they shelled the supply lines, you couldn't get anything but days on end. They were live in a machine gun team, and everything we had was shared amongst us. I used to get a parcel from home. My mother knew the grocer pretty well. There was always an ounce of tobacco and 2 packets of 20 cigarettes that was handed to number 1 to share out. That ounce of tobacco, number 3, was a pipe smoker, same as I was cut in half. He had half, I had half. The cigarettes, 13 each for the others, and they took it in turns to have the odd one. And if you've got a pair of socks and somebody else had a pair of holes in, they'll chuck them away and they'll have the new ones. That was the life we lived, because we never knew from one moment to the next when something would come over with our number on.
Smokes for the Somersets. 1,450 pounds of tobacco for Tommy's pipe. Gazette readers' gift to the troops. With the idea of keeping Tommy's pipe filled, the readers of the Somerset County Gazette have subscribed up to date £140 to the Special Tobacco Fund organised by this journal. As a result, over 1,400 pounds of tobacco have been sent to the front in the form of 5,600 quarter-pound packages. In addition, 56,000 cigarettes have been sent. This is a most excellent record for a fund which, though scarcely 3 weeks old, has already enlisted the sympathies of many hundreds of our readers. Scarcely a soldier's letter but complains of the tobacco scarcity. Every sixpence contributed sends to the trenches an amount of tobacco and cigarettes which in England would have cost at least 1 7 owing to the duty.
Tobacco was not the only thing sent to give comfort to troops in the front line. Coming from a generation for whom church-going was commonplace, religious faith was important to many serving soldiers.
Many millions of New Testaments and Gospels, such as these, were issued to soldiers at training camps, distributed through charity huts at the front. Wounded soldiers were given them by nurses or handed out by chaplains. They were designed to be carried in the front pocket of the uniforms, as the edges are rounded to prevent creases. Hymns were included in the back so that chaplains could hold services in each field. Each gospel has a message from the war hero Lord Roberts printed on the inside. Many servicemen drew comfort from God's words when they were afraid, strength when under pressure, and comfort in the face of death. Lord Roberts' inscription on the inside of the Gospels is as follows: I ask you to put your trust in God. He will watch over you and strengthen you. You will find in this book guidance when you are in health, comfort when you are in sickness, and strength when you are in adversity. I will pass these round the table if people would like to look at them. Thank you.
The Somerset Gazette, October 1914. Gazette in the Trenches. A Taunton soldier's letter home. The following letter, written by Private Victor Danby of the 1st Battalion Somerset Light Infantry in the trenches along the banks of the River Ain, was received by his father, Mr. A.E. Danby of 3 Gifford Street, Priory, Taunton, on Sunday. I now take the opportunity of writing again to you to let you know that I am still alive and well. I received your letter and the Somerset Gazette, quite safe, and was very pleased to get it. I think it was the first English paper we had to read. It has gone all round our platoon, as all the boys were glad to see a bit of Somerset news. Do you know the names of the 9 men who arrived at Taunton from the front? We were all quite surprised when we read it. We are still having a lively time of it, and I suppose it will always be the same until it's all over. We are all sticking it ground, but we are beginning to feel the cold a bit at night. I suppose it will be a winter campaign for us, so we have got the worst to come yet. I see by the paper that they are just beginning to realise that we want more big guns. They've taken ever since the Boer War until now to discover it. Never mind, better late than never, I suppose. Private Danby, who's only 21 years of age, joined the Somerset 3 years ago. His father, who is employed at the Free Library, is an old soldier and member of the National Reserve.
From the Somerset Gazette, 1914. Theft from farmhouse at Blagden Hill. Serious charge against Taunton boy. At a special sitting of the Taunton County Bench on Thursday before the Mayor and Mr. J.E. Wakefield, a boy aged 15 named Thomas Hayes of 6 Court, Shuttern, was charged with having on the 17th instant stolen from the dwelling house of Walter Honeyball 1 gent's silver watch, value 20 shillings, also 2 threepenny pieces at Blagden. Bessie Honeyball, wife of Walter Honeyball of Brookfield Farm, Blagden, stated that on Tuesday morning about 9 o'clock she left the house to go into Taunton. On the mantelpiece in a box were 2 threepenny pieces. She returned about 5 o'clock, and later in the evening her husband made a communication to her respecting the cash box. Walter Honeyball, the prosecutor, stated that about 8 o'clock on Tuesday evening, he went to the cash box on the mantelpiece in the front kitchen and found it empty. The next morning, he missed a watch, which had also been left on the mantelpiece and which was in good condition. Now the watch, as produced, was damaged, the hands being broken off. Witness gave information to the police. The house lay about 30 yards from the main road. P.C. Elkins, stationed at Blagden, stated that the boy worked for Mr. John Marks and was sent to Mr. Honeyball's house every morning to fetch milk. On the previous morning, having received a complaint from the prosecutor, he went to his premises at Brookfield Farm and was shown in the front kitchen a cash box and a nail over the mantelpiece where a watch had been hanging the previous day. Making inquiries in the village, he found that the defendant had been to the Lamb Inn and had there spent 2 threepenny pieces on cigarettes. He went to see the boy and charged him with the theft, and in reply he said, "Mr. Marks, who I work for, sent me down to Mr. Honeyball's yesterday just after 1 o'clock to ask him if he could come up. I found the door open. I knocked but couldn't make anyone hear. So I walked in, took the silver watch and 2 threepenny pieces from a tin box. I spent the money at the Lamb Inn on cigarettes, and the watch I have in my box, but I have torn the hands off the watch." Witness afterwards found the watch produced in his box. Mr. Wakefield said, "The watch and box could not have been seen from the outside door. The boy must have entered the house to see the things." He inquired respecting the cigarettes at the Lamb Inn and found that the boy has stated when he bought them that he was over 16 years of age. Defendant pleaded guilty, and Police Sergeant Giles reported previous cases against him for stealing apples in 1910 and for stealing tobacco in May 1913 when he was placed on probation. The father had done his best for the boy. Mr. J. Marks stated that while the lad had been in his employ, he had found him a good worker and had no complaint to make against him. The bench remanded the defendant to the workhouse with the object of having him sent to a training ship or industrial school. P.C. Elkins remarked that he believed cigarette smoking had been the lad's downfall. He smoked 4 or 5 packs a day.
I could say it is now time for a cigarette break, but I won't. Instead, I'll say it is now time for a break, during which we'll have our food. I thought we'd start the second half with a song, and Jenny Fogg has chosen her favourite, which is Keep the Home Fires Burning. So, take it away, Nick.
That's the introduction. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Nick. Over the next year, the war had spread to become a global conflict. Allied with the French and the British, the Imperial Russian Army was engaged on 2 fronts, with the Germans across what is now Poland and with the Austro-Hungarians further south. Winston Churchill, as First Lord of the Admiralty, persuaded the British government in April 1915 to invade the Mediterranean coast of Turkey near the Bosporus, with a view to driving a wedge between 2 of the Central Powers, the Ottoman Empire to the south and the Austro-Hungarians to the north. This would also assure a secure southern route for the French and British to supply their Russian allies. The plan was a disaster from start to finish, but British and Commonwealth troops did manage to establish some toeholds along the Gallipoli Peninsula for a short while. Ben Price from Gloucester had hoped to join the Gloucestershire Regiment, but instead was sent to the Royal Army Ordnance Corps. This is the account he sent to his wife of his duties as the NCO in charge of in charge of an ammunition dump on the beach. The lighter, he describes, was an early form of landing craft.
Ben Price. On Friday, August the 6th, we had orders to pack everything, fill our water bottles to be ready at 2 o'clock. Then we had the first inkling of what was before us. One of us fellows, Royal Army Ordnance Corps, had to be on each of the boats in charge of ammunition on his boat. Our orders was to stay on board until it was all ashore, then dig in and await orders. The only equipment we were allowed to take was a haversack and, of course, our rifles. In the haversack were 12 pencils, a few pens, a notebook and some pins that comprised our office stationery. We had 4 days' rations and we were told we might get some water in 4 days, or it might be a week. I embarked on a lighter called K1. As Richard just described, this is an early form of landing craft. And we were towed by a destroyer until 5 minutes from the land. We thought it would be a surprise, but the ships met a perfect hail of bullets. The men on deck were told to lie down, but several were hit, and then full speed for the shore, then over the side, and the boys were up to their waists in water, and were soon giving it to the Turks with their bayonets. They were not allowed to fire a shot until daybreak. At length, dawn broke and revealed us to the Turkish guns, and then it was hell with a vengeance. A whole battery of guns smothered us with shells, shrapnel and high explosive, beside the hail of bullets. One poor fellow got hit with shrapnel right through his head. The captain found it impossible to move the boat, and then a shell came and hit the boat full on one end, filling the hold with fumes and pitching us about. At this, the crew got out, unknown to the coxswain and myself, and we found ourselves all alone on a burning ship with all that ammunition. I was the last to get off, and fortunately a boat picked me up from the water. The ammunition was got off safely in the afternoon, and our dump was just by the advanced dressing station. There the doctors worked heroically with hundreds of wounded soldiers. The sun simply beat down on those poor fellows, besides which they were under shell fire the whole time. During the next days and nights, people were constantly coming for ammunition, and just as constantly another convoy came and filled my dump up. At 2 o'clock on the 21st, all our ships and land batteries started up together. The guns set the grass alight and covered the hills with smoke, and it seemed impossible for anyone to live under it. But when our fellows attacked, they were met, as usual, by Mr. Turk. At 3 o'clock, one of our brigades and the yeomanry were ordered to advance. They suffered terribly, and at night, with the grass burning and the guns thundering, it made an awful sight. When I realized that a lot of our fellows were lying wounded in the burning grass, it seemed terrible. Our dugout was composed of boxes of ammunition that saved us from shrapnel several times, though I shudder to think what would have happened if a high explosive shell had happened to drop in the middle, as just outside were hundreds of rounds of field gun ammunition. It would not have been safe within 3 miles, let alone 3 yards. High explosive shells aren't hardly the best companions, but there it was. It couldn't be helped.
On the side of the Central Powers, and supplies from Germany, including modern aircraft, began to arrive in Turkey. The Allies decided to withdraw. The Suvla Bay beachhead was abandoned on the 20th of December 1915, and able seaman Jack Gearing described his eyewitness view of the events.
When we withdrew on the 20th of December, it was dark. The soldiers were all packed so tight and quiet in the barges, making their way to the big ships. We never lost a man, which was remarkable. As we were steaming quietly away, I thought of what Pincher Martin, who had done 20 years in the Navy, had said to me a few days after we had arrived at Suvla Bay. Oh, we're not going to be flying the Union Jack here. He was right. We were never going to make it ours.
After the Allied withdrawal, the Turks, Germans and Austrians determined to push southwards across Sinai and invade British-held Egypt with a view to taking the Suez Canal. The advance of this large force through the desert was slow, and the British and Empire forces had time to prepare a strong defensive position at a town called Romani, about 23 miles east of the canal.
The engagement started with a successful surprise attack on the British 5th Mounted Brigade at Katia, and the brigade, which included the Warwickshire Yeomanry, was forced to withdraw. Amongst them was, we believe, William George Leaney. Trooper Leaney had enlisted in 1916 and served as a galloper, carrying messages for the commanding officer. The Allied forces, mainly Anzac mounted troops, gradually fell back towards Romani, but by carefully concerted action, presumably largely thanks to the work of the gallopers, the attackers were drawn off into deep sand and the assault petered out. There followed a gradual withdrawal, all the while harried by the Australian mounted brigades until the invaders had been pushed all the way back to El Arish in the north.
This action was the start of the long, slow Allied advance through Palestine and the Middle East, which culminated in the establishment of the now notorious arbitrary boundary between Syria and Iraq, the Sykes-Picot line. NCO Leaney had a part to play in this as well. Hujj is a Palestinian Arab village to the northeast of Gaza. During the Third Battle of Gaza, under pressure from the British attack, the majority of Turkish forces had withdrawn from the area. At around 1400 hours on 8 November 1917, the pursuing British infantry was stopped by artillery fire from a strong rearguard position of German, Austrian and Turkish artillery, around 300 infantry and 6 machine guns. Aware that his infantry division alone would have problems taking the position, the British commander requested assistance from mounted troops.
The only cavalry in the area were 2 full squadrons and 2 half squadrons from the Worcestershire and Warwickshire Yeomanry, 170 men. The squadrons advanced under cover of the terrain to within 300 yards of the enemy position, drew their lances and swords and charged. The Warwickshire Yeomanry Squadron attacked the main force of Turkish infantry, then turned and attacked the gun line. The German and Austrian artillerymen carried on firing until the horsemen were around 20 yards away. Then some took cover underneath their guns. Those who remained standing were mostly cut down by the British cavalrymen. The attack was successful, and the main force of infantry withdrew, leaving the guns undefended apart from their crews. The yeomanry captured 70 prisoners, 11 artillery guns and 4 machine guns. British casualties amounted to 26 men dead, including 3 squadron commanding officers and 40 wounded. 100 horses were also killed in the charge. This was probably the last British cavalry battle charge with lances drawn. And when NCO Leaney arrived at the guns, immediately after the attack, he witnessed the death of a Turkish gunner mortally wounded by a lance.
William Leahy's war was not over yet. In April 1918, the Warwickshire Yeomanry left the brigade as dismounted troops to become part of the Machine Gun Corps. The unit embarked from Alexandria aboard HMT Liso Castle to travel to Italy in a convoy protected by an escort of various Allied destroyers, including one Japanese vessel. Japan joined the war as a British ally on 14th August 1914. At 1:30 a.m. on May 27, 1918, when the ship was about 104 miles from Alexandria, the Liso Castle was struck by a torpedo fired by a German submarine. A contemporary report reads as follows.
The engines were immediately stopped. The troops mustered to their stations, rolls were called, boats lowered, and rafts flung overboard. The Japanese destroyer R stood by, while the remainder of the convoy continued on their journey at full speed. We are informed that perfect order was maintained on board, the men standing quietly at their stations as if on parade, while those detailed for the work assisted in lowering the boats. Lifeboats were launched in the course of 45 minutes, and the rescue attempt continued smoothly. All of B, Warwickshire Yeomanry Company of the battalion, went over the port side and were picked up in the water. About 1:45 a.m., HM sloop Lily appeared, having turned back from the convoy to assist in the work of rescue. She ran her bows up to the starboard side of the Liso Castle and made fast, so that troops were able to pass quickly on board. Suddenly, about 3 a.m., a bulkhead in the aft part of the ship gave way, and with a loud noise, the Liso Castle sank rapidly. The Lily had a narrow escape, as the hawsers connecting her with the sinking ship were cut with an axe just in time. 93 men were lost, along with all the horses, but over 2,800 men managed to survive the sinking. The survivors returned to Alexandria, and it was at this point that NCO Leany was selected for training in the UK to become an officer. He was duly commissioned into the Royal Engineers, but the war ended before he saw further active service.
In November 1919, William Leany married Bessie Darling, who had joined as a voluntary aid detachment nurse in 1915, serving in Erdington in Birmingham, where she nursed wounded soldiers returning from France. VAD was founded in 1909 by the British Red Cross and the Order of St. John, and during the 4 years of the war, 38,000 VADs worked in hospitals and served as ambulance drivers and cooks. VADs served near the Western Front and in Mesopotamia and Gallipoli. VAD hospitals were also opened in most large towns in Britain. There were also plenty of other opportunities for women to help the war effort.
Further weekly whispers for women. From your special lady correspondent. Money being made everywhere. It is a fact that war is giving chances to women they would never have had otherwise. And almost every day I hear of instances where young women are successfully working in new employment and earning large sums. A young girl learnt motor driving and has now a garage of her own, where she teaches motor driving and earns a large income. Another took up shorthand and after 3 months was able to attain a good speed. She now gives lessons and is doing well. Yet another obtained a post as secretary to a colonel stationed abroad at £3.10 a week. Girls are largely employed in the War Office and the Admiralty, and those who make good are being well paid and enjoying the new life, which some say is better than teaching and less monotonous.
As the war dragged on, these opportunities became rather more imperative.
The calling up of all men eligible for military service has resulted in an immense opportunity for women who are willing and able to work. Take up any paper and read down the advertisement columns. 90% offer women who are wanted to act as secretaries, typists, shorthand writers, clerks in offices and banks, munition workers, war workers, etc., etc. In fact, no woman of physical and mental ability need be out of employment today. And even elderly women from 50 to 60 are eagerly engaged, and many of them prove more reliable and satisfactory than some of the younger and giddier girls. It is to me earnestly hoped that this unprecedented demand for women's labour will not result in any slackling on their part. Up to the present, the majority have answered the call with commendable promptitude and have given universal satisfaction. There are still too many droves in the hive. Women who seem to have no idea beyond clothes and amusements, empty-headed and shallow, who do infinite mischief in consequence. These are the women who crowd the shops where the latest fashions are displayed, and who appear to have unlimited cash at their disposal. If we are to achieve the desired end, which we have in view, there must be no kind of slackness. Will not these slackers sacrifice vanity for victory?
Meanwhile, men continued to be recruited and after 1916 conscripted into the armed forces, mostly as soldiers, but a few into the Navy or to other war work.
The task of the Royal Navy during the First World War was both to safeguard our merchant shipping and to prevent a German invasion of the United Kingdom. In other words, they had to ensure British supremacy on the high seas. The Germans had built up a formidable fleet of capital ships during the arms race before the war, while Great Britain retained the largest, if not the most modern, navy in the world. After evading a battle in the first 2 years of the war, the German fleet emerged from their bases at the insistence of the Kaiser to engage the British fleet at the Battle of Jutland. Although both sides suffered heavy losses, the German fleet broke off the engagement and retreated to their bases. They never came out again until, at the end of the war, they steamed to Scapa Flow in the Orkney Islands to surrender. Scapa Flow had been the operational base for the British fleet during that war. After a short time at anchor in Scapa Flow, the German admiral gave the order for his ships to scuttle themselves. Up to the end of the Second World War, many of these ships remained on the seabed, while others were salvaged for scrap. At that time, my father was the Admiralty civil servant in charge of supplying the British fleet at Scapa Flow with food and clothing, and for a very short time the Germans too.
Angela Hellier has kindly given us some information about her father who served in the First War, and this is what she writes. My father, Kenneth Carey Hellier, at the beginning of World War I, was an officer in the Royal Navy, which he had joined as a naval cadet at the age of 14. His most notable exploit during the war was to take part in the Battle of Zeebrugge, which took place on St. George's Day, the 23rd of April 1918. By this time he was a lieutenant commander and was in command of a destroyer HMS North Star. During the battle, his ship was hit by shells fired by the German guns on the shore and began to sink. One of the other destroyers came to try and help and to rescue the survivors. This ship, HMS Phoebe, was commanded by Lieutenant Commander Hubert Gore Langton, who, when I was a small child, lived at Flyboat Farm between Pitminster and Corfe. My father very reluctantly had to order the crew to abandon ship and was himself the last to leave. They were picked up by HMS Phoebe. My father was awarded the DSO and the French Croix de Guerre for what he did in this battle. He died in the Second War, and his name is on the memorial of that war in Pitminster Church. And we've since been able to find out a little bit more about the engagement from the official Admiralty record.
This is an extract from the dispatches from the Vice Admiral commanding the Dover Patrol on Zeebrugge and the Ostend operations on the 22nd and the 23rd of April 1918. He writes, I desire to relate the proceedings of some of the vessels of the 6th Destroyer Flotilla under the command of Captain Wilfred Tompkinson and the Warwick flying my flag, which came under my own observation or of special interest or merit. The Trident and Mansfield, after parting company from their submarines, covered the western flotilla of smoke-screening small craft. The Warwick, Phoebe and North Star cruised off the mole to protect the assaulting craft from torpedo attack. These duties took the destroyers close inshore, and they were frequently under heavy fire from guns of all calibers at short range. While the Warwick was engaged as stated in the preceding paragraph, the North Star, having lost her bearings in the smoke, emerged from the smoke screen to the southeastward of the lighthouse. Seeing some vessels alongside the mole, she fired all her torpedoes at them and withdrew, but coming under very heavy fire at point-blank range, she was immediately disabled and was soon in a sinking condition. The Phoebe, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Hubert E. Gore Langton, was handled with conspicuous gallantry while under this heavy fire. She repeatedly circled round the North Star, making smoke screens and attempting under their cover to tow her out of action. She was twice successful in getting her in tow, the hawser being shot away once and parted once. Phoebe then went alongside North Star and endeavoured to tow her in that way. North Star, however, was in a sinking condition, and being continually hit in these circumstances, Mr. Gore Langton ordered the abandonment of the North Star, standing by her and taking off all her company who were left alive. I regret that the North Star was lost, but the conduct of Lieutenant Commander Kenneth C. Hellier and his company was all that could be desired, the North Star not being abandoned until all possibility of salving her was gone. The Lieutenant Commander of Phoebe states that Mr. Hellier, by his coolness and calm devotion to duty, set a splendid example to all. The ship was totally disabled and constantly being hit. He would not leave his bridge until ordered twice to abandon his ship when she was obviously sinking under him and could not be saved. He also did his utmost to assist the Phoebe in every way to take him in tow.
The war took a terrible toll on the men who served. Apart from the 880,000 from Britain and the Empire who died, few came back without deep physical or mental scars. But despite the huge national mobilization and the terrible statistics, the life expectancy of junior officers on a Western Front was said to be just 6 weeks. Some communities lost no men at all.
In Somerset, there are 9 thankful villages. This means the total number from each village that enlisted for the war returned home. The named villages are Aisholt, Chantry, Chelwood, Holywell Lake, Rodney Stoke, Shapwick, Stocklink, Tellisford and Woolley. No other county had as many as Somerset. 2 of these villages were doubly thankful as they lost none in World War II. It is assumed that this was due to the demands on agriculture to feed the country, so fewer men were called up or successfully appealed enlistment as they worked the land. The term thankful village was first coined by the writer Arthur Mee in 1930. He noted on his travels around England, compiling his guide to the counties of England, that 42 villages had no war memorials. It is amazing that 42 villages sent men to war and all come back. Somerset County Council has given plaques to Rodney Stoke, Aisholt and Stocklink, which read, "Thankful Village for those who served in the First World War." Rodney Stoke is the only village that has a stained glass window in the church dedicated as a permanent war memorial and thanksgiving.
But at the same time, some of the finest poetry of the last century was inspired by events during the Great War. And ordinary men sometimes found expression for their feelings in verse. Ben Price, whose story we heard earlier, wrote an annual reflection on Armistice Day in the Gloucester Citizen between the wars. Ben was a dairy manager in the city, and this is one of his pieces entitled "The Muse in Arms."
Okay, right. This is Ben Price. Now, the writing of verse is sometimes received in circles that lack discernment, with a certain amount of scorn. It is thought mistakenly to be unmanly, but a little thought and study would convince such critics of the unwisdom of this attitude. There are recent examples of the power of verse to move men, written under conditions that might well make for the destruction of all beauty. Even as you find in the most unlikely spot some beautiful flower amid the carnage of war, so do you find men who detach themselves from their surroundings and rise to sublime heights of beauty of word, but who time and again prove their valour, and many of whom made the supreme sacrifice. These choice spirits, many whom are alas no more, have left this noble heritage of beauty, which is one of the few things of good, if such a thing is possible, left by the war. And this is one of Ben's own poems, written on New Year's Eve, 1914. Hope. Again, the eternal sequence of the days has brought us to a year's sad close. Yesterday we'll from our minds erase. Today, hope must all thoughts transpose. The old year gone, with its attendant woes, the new year dawns, and would our hearts inspire, and bid the gloom depart in bright glory of the rising year.
And here's another poem by W.N. Hodgson, who died in 1916. It's called Before Action. By all the glories of the day and the cool evening's benison, by that last sunset touch that lay upon the hills where day was done, by beauty lavishly outpoured and blessings carelessly received, by all the days that I have lived, make me a soldier, Lord. By all of man's hopes and fears, and all the wonders poets sing, the laughter of unclouded years, and every sad and lovely thing, by the romantic ages stored with high endeavour that was his, by all his mad catastrophes, make me a man, O Lord. I, that on my familiar hill saw with uncomprehending eyes 100 of thy sunsets spill their fresh and sanguine sacrifice, ere the sun swings his noonday sword, must say goodbye to all of this. By all delights that I shall miss, help me to die, O Lord.
Yet amongst all great writing, and the accounts of dreadful hardship and extraordinary courage that emerge from this conflict, it is sometimes the simplest of descriptions of ordinary and everyday things that speak to us across the century. For example, the few words on the postcards or photographs sent back by William Leaney.
Sent from Warwick on the 19th of November 1914 to Mrs. F.G. Whittle, Eversley, Kingsbury Road, Erdington, Birmingham. Dear Mrs. W, I cannot get up on Friday night, but shall be up by the first train on Saturday morning. Kindest regards to all. Sincerely yours, C. That was a short version of Chappie. Sent from Morton in the Marsh on the 26th of April 1915 to Miss Bessie Darling Whittle. Dear Bess, arrived here safely at 5 o'clock. Fine day, pleased to get here, billeted at a pub, very comfy looking bedroom, sharing with another man. Kindest regards to all, C. And written on the back of a photograph on the 4th of August 1916, immediately before going into action at Romani. Please keep this very carefully. It is the only one I have.
Amongst Ben Price's papers, his family found a little autograph or commonplace book. People that he encountered, often wounded soldiers he met in hospital, wrote a few words for him to remember them by. And perhaps we can still hear in their words faint echoes of the turmoil and momentous events of those days.
H.W. Parsons, Wigston, Leicestershire, later the 14th Regiment, November the 14th, 1916.
while weeks and months pass swiftly by, keep smiling every day. And as life's path you firmly tread, keep smiling all the way. As now in shade and now in sun, the world its course must daily run. May you through every change abide, always on the sunny side. Is the wish of Private J.A. Nettleton, one of the Fighting Fifth, wounded in Salonika, 3rd December 1915.
This one is written by Lance Corporal W.J. Capson of the 1st 10th County of London Regiment at Suvla Bay, August 1915. The happiest time of my life was spent in the arms of another man's wife, my mother.
Sapper F. Herbert, 1st Royal Gloucester Hussars Yeomanry, drafted to Egypt April the 9th, 1915, went to Dardanelles August the 14th, 1915, invalided to England January 1916, Robbins Farm, Matson.
Private J.H. Jones is my name. To the RWF I belong. I've been in the trenches and sung many a song. I've fed on bully beef and biscuits and tons of Deacon's jam. But since I've been in Lydney, why, I'm quite a different man. From Taffy.
This is a record of Dr. R. Millard of D Battery, 156 Brigade, 39th Division of the RFA, who was buried by a shell for 6 hours on December the 1st, 1915. He entered Lydney on February the 10th, 1916. He goes on to say, where I met the owner of this book while I was under treatment at the town hall for a broken leg and arm.
Corporal W. Blandon of the 1st Suffolk Yeomanry wrote this in March the 1st, 1916. God and the soldier is the cry. When war is over and danger righted, God is forgotten and the soldier slighted.
From Sapper Watkins, Royal Engineers, March the 29th, 1916. When the golden sun is sinking and your mind from care is free, when of others you are thinking, will you sometimes think of me? With best wishes to its owner.
Private E. Vickers, 8th Canadian Infantry Battalion, Winnipeg, Canada. Drafted to France, 1915, returned to England, July 1916.
Private Horace W. Parson, Leicestershire Regiment. France, February 1915 to May 1915, wounded. From France, August 1915, February 1916, shell shock. Maghill Hospital, May 1916 to September 1916, discharged. Praise God, from whom all blessings flow.
Marion R. Hart, Cook, Red Cross Hospital, Lydney.
And to end, good night Good night? Nay, love, the night is ill, that severs those it should unite. Let us remain together, still, then it will be good night. Thomas O'Shaughnessy, the Irish poet.
And a final extract from the Somerset Gazette, January 1916. Should married men wear wedding rings? Many soldiers' wives are buying wedding rings to send to their husbands at the front. The man's ring is flat, and it is not yet decided whether it should be worn on the right or the left hand third finger. It is a fact that some married men like to be thought free and under the character of eligible bachelors, and have frequently won fair and innocent maidens' affections. Lately, however, it has become the custom for young married men to adopt the wedding ring, and there appears no valid reasons why they should not. It is said to be a German custom and hence detestable. But French men wear a wedding ring, and so do the Swiss and many other foreigners. I cannot see why the wife should not be labelled as wedded unless the husband is, and it would be decidedly safer in these days.
We might follow that by a song, Over There, which was popular in the Second War as well, I think, with reference to the Americans. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes the formal part of the evening, but I'm sure some of you may want to stay and enjoy a drink and a chat with our friends. What a lovely village occasion it's been this evening. Thank you all for being part of it.
Well, can I add my own words of welcome to those that Richard has already given, and especially to Jonathan and Leslie Treat, who I think can probably have the honour of having travelled the furthest distance to be with us today. Thank you so much for crossing the waters to be here. Many of you will be familiar with the long association of the Treat family with the parish of Pitminster and all the support that they have given and continue to give. So we're delighted to welcome you today. Thank you very much. But welcome to you all, whether you come just round the corner or across the ocean. And I must take this opportunity also of offering congratulations and enormous thanks to those who have put this exhibition together, something of which you can be enormously proud. And we've heard that it will live on for a bit yet on the website, which is good news. Let us also let it live on in our memories and carry some of those things that we have seen and read with us and continue to reflect on them. And the purpose of this occasion is to take a few moments to reflect on what we have read, what we have seen, and the memories that we bring and share together. Before we move on with words, I feel that we need to keep a moment's silence at the start as we reflect not just on all that we've read and remember, but as we try and take in this ghastly news over the weekend of the beheading of Alan Henning, and stand or sit for a moment in silence in honour of him and what he was seeking to do, and in remembrance of his family and friends in their grief at this time. An exhibition such as the one that we have over in the Skittle Alley at the Lamb and Flag does three things. It takes us back as we stand and read the stories of those people who are featured there, as we look at the actual belongings of some of them, and the medals and the spoons and all those things. We're taken back to that previous generation, that previous era. And we have members of the youth group actually to remind us of some of those things as they sit here in their not too comfortable gear, perhaps, but very reminiscent of that time. But at the same time, the exhibition holds us in the future, because we are where we are now. We perhaps had no part whatever, or just a tangential part in what's written up there. And we come from all the business of our daily lives to stand in that place, to look back. But we still are where we are. And at the same time, it points us to the future, because we think back to those times and all that went on then, that we read about and that we see with these visible symbols of that time. And we think, what have we learned? Have we learned anything? How do we go forward in our times, battling against some of the same issues? So in these few moments we have together, I'd like to think in three acts of where they were, where we are, and where we want to go. Where they were. I wonder if you have particular memories of something that you've seen in that exhibition, something that just seemed to stand out, a story, an artifact, a model, a poster, whatever, that you will carry with you from your visit. The one that struck me was Fred Butler, who kept running away so that he could join up and be part of the action. Before he was old enough, he ran away and went in undercover until he was found out and sent back. But even so, he ran away again to the Navy this time. But all that he was so keen to get involved in the years that followed, he was never able to speak about that experience. And that struck me. The thing you really want to do has such a profound effect upon your life that you really are never the same again and cannot talk about it. We can only begin to imagine what these people went through and carried with them for the rest of their lives. This exhibition gives us some glimpses, maybe. And you'll have noticed that the Bible played an important part in the soldier's kit, in the life of the day. There was nothing odd about that the Bible was a standard part of a soldier's kit. Everyone was given a New Testament as they set out. And in most of them will have appeared this message from Field Marshal Lord Roberts, and you can see it reproduced in the testaments over there. He writes, "I ask you to put your trust in God. He will watch over you and strengthen you. You will find in this little book guidance when you are in health, comfort when you are in sickness, and strength when you are in adversity." Many did indeed do so, as letters and diaries bear witness. Dr. Michael Snape, reader in Religion, War and Society at Birmingham University, comments, "The Bible connected soldiers with their loved ones emotionally and devotionally, as they may have agreed to read the same texts. And it was hugely consoling for individual soldiers. There are poignant stories from the Battle of the Somme of bodies being recovered from shell holes, men who died with a New Testament in their hands." And he says, what else could you do if you were alone, badly wounded, and going to meet your Maker? We're going to conclude this first section of our reflection with 4 readings. Martha will read a poem written by Ben Price, whose story is one of those contained in the exhibition. Then Elliot will read a poem by Lawrence Binion. Thirdly, Jack will read a letter written by a resident of Taunton back to his family. And Jenny will lastly read parts of the Bible which may very well have been read over and over again by soldiers on active service, using the words as they would have read them. Martha, thank you.
Written by Ben Price on New Year's Eve, 1914. Hope. Again, the eternal sequence of the days has brought us to a year's sad close. Yesterday, will from our minds erase. Today, hope must all our thoughts transpose. The old year gone with its attendant woes, the new year dawns, and would our hearts inspire, and bid the gloom depart in bright glory of the rising year.
For the Fallen by Lawrence Binion. With proud thanksgiving, a mother for her children, England mourns for her dead across the sea. Flesh of her flesh they were, spirit of a spirit, fallen in the cause of the free. Solemn the drums thrill, deaf, august and royal, sing sorrow up in immortal spheres. There is music in the mist of desolation, and a glory that shines upon our tears. They went with songs to the battle, they were young, straight of limb, true of eye, steady and aglow. They were staunch to the end against odds encountered, they fell with their faces to the face. They shall not grow old, as they are left to grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. They mingle not with their laughing comrades again. They sit no more at the familiar tables of home. They have no lot in labours of the daytime. They sleep beyond England's foam. But where our desires and our hopes found profound, felt as wellspring that is hidden from sight, to the innermost heart of their own land they are known, as the stars are known to the night. As the stars that shall not be bright when we are dust, moving in the marches upon the heavenly plain, as the stars that are starry in the time of our darkness, to the end, they remain.
Taunton's soldiers left her home. The following letter, written by Private Victor Danby of the 1st Battalion, Somerset Light Infantry, in the trenches along the banks of the River Ain, was received by his father, Mr. A.F. Danby of 3 Giffard Street, Priory, Taunton, on Sunday. I now take the opportunity of writing to you to let you know that I am still alive and well. I received your letter in the Somerset County Gazette quite safe, and was very pleased to get it. I think it was the first English newspaper we've had to read. It's gone all around our platoon, as all the boys were glad to see a bit of Somerset news. Do you know the names of the 9 men who arrived at Taunton from the front? We were all quite surprised when we read it. We were still having a lively time of it, and I suppose it will always be the same until it's all over. We are sticking it ground, but we are beginning to feel the cold a bit at night. I suppose it will be a winter campaign for us, as we have just got the worst to come yet. I see by the paper they are just beginning to realise we want more big guns. They have taken ever since the Boer War until now to discover it. Never mind, better late than never, I suppose. Private Danby, who is only 21 years of age, joined the Somersets 3 years ago. His father, who is employed at the Free Library, is an old soldier, a member of the National Reserve.
To lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod, thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
In your presence, Almighty God, we give thanks for those who put duty before life, who endured hardship, torture, and death, that others might be free. We remember those who were killed in action or by disease, the bereaved, the lost, the families that were shattered, the wounded, maimed, and injured, and those who for long years held in silence unspeakable memories of warfare. Almighty God, heal all memories and speak your word of peace. We have thought a little of where they were. We turn to think of where we are. With so many local names on the boards of people who are our neighbours, acquaintances, friends, we suddenly feel a greater link with those whose stories are written up here. And perhaps we find ourselves thinking 2 or 3 generations ago, that could have been me. In our imaginations, perhaps, we think about how we would have felt, how we would feel today if confronted by the same choices. Where would we look for those connections with our loved ones? Where would we look for strength, courage, and help outside ourselves? Harry is going to read the psalm which Jenny has just read to us, but in a contemporary version.
You, Lord, are my shepherd. I will never be in need. You let me rest in fields of green grass. You lead me to streams of peaceful water, and you refresh my life. You are true to your name, and you lead me along the right paths. I may walk through valleys as dark as death, but I won't be afraid. You are with me, and your shepherd's rod makes me feel safe. You treat me to a feast whilst my enemies watch. You honour me as your guest, and you fill my cup until it overflows. Your kindness and love will always be with me each day of my life, and I will live forever in your house, Lord.
When the lights went out in the First World War, and in all the conflicts since, when millions died in foul trenches or mass genocide, when many have died and continue to die from acts of terror or revenge, Almighty God, we stand today mourning for the goodness and wisdom that died with them, for the skill and wit that perished, the learning, the laughter, and the leadership that were lost, the hearts and minds that were blighted by the horrible visions from which they could not escape nor find a way to share. Lord, have mercy, and make us worthy successors in the ongoing story of your world. And do we reflect where it is that we want to go? There are no league tables in the catalogue of war and the horrors that accompany it. Fear, injury, pain, loss of life, courage, skill, determination, and self-sacrifice are real and powerful, whatever their degree, their time, and their place. And this weekend we know only too well that the world of 1914, 1918 has not really gone away. That war was not the one to end all wars. And the remarkable discoveries and advances we have made in the succeeding years within the freedom won by those brave men and women have not completely changed the world. So as we look to where they were and stand and think of where we are, where do we really want to go? And where are we going to look for a map to go there? Can we still hear the message of Field Marshal Lord Roberts? I ask you to put your trust in God. He will watch over you and strengthen you. You will find in that book guidance when you are in health, comfort when you are in sickness, and strength when you are in adversity. John is going to read to us a final psalm.
Lord, through all the generations, you have been our home. Before the mountains were born, before you gave birth to the earth and the world, from beginning to end, you are God. You turn people back to dust, saying, "Return to dust, you mortals." For you, 1,000 years are as a passing day, as brief as a few night hours. You spread out our sins before you, our secret sins, and you see them all. We live our lives beneath your wrath, ending our years with a groan. 70 years are given to us, some even live to 80. But even the best years are filled with pain and trouble. Teach us to realize the brevity of life, so that we may grow in wisdom. O Lord, come back to us. How long will you delay? Take pity on your servants. Satisfy us each morning with your unfailing love, so we may sing for joy to the end of our lives. Give us gladness in proportion to our former misery. Replace the evil years with good. Let us, your servants, see you work again. Let our children see your glory. And may the Lord our God show us his approval and prosper the work of our hands.
I hope that most of you have or are within sight of one of the pink slips. I invite you all now to join with me to pray this prayer together as we look to the future. Lord God, Father of all, we pledge ourselves to serve you and this neighborhood, to bring relief to all who are in need, and comfort to the sad, lonely, and distressed. Keep us ever mindful of the struggles and achievements of former generations, and of this place where we make our home, now and in the days to come. Amen. Go forth into the world in peace. Be of good courage. Hold fast that which is good. Render to no man evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the afflicted. Honor all men. Love and serve the Lord, rejoicing in the power of the Holy Spirit. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be upon you and those you love, and remain with you forever. Amen.